to the Liberty Podcast with Clint Armitage. We are proclaiming liberty one show at a time, and the next one starts right now. Okay, you know what time it is. It's time for another episode of the Liberty Podcast. My name is Clint Armitage. So we're in the series of the signs of judgment. This is part 6, and we're talking about Harbinger number 5. So what we're going to do, just like in the past episodes, we're going to play an excerpt about Harbinger number 5. Let's listen in.
And the 5th Harbinger. But we will rebuild with hewn stone. The project of rebuilding began with the laying down of hewn stone. The Hebrew word behind hewn stone is gazit. The word gazit refers to a stone quarried from mountain rock and used for constructing buildings of strength and magnitude. The gazit stone was most often a massive rectangular block of quarried rock. So the people of Israel went to the mountains and quarries and brought back the gazit stone to the ground of the fallen buildings. The gazit, or quarried stone, became the start of the nation's rebuilding, the embodiment of its vow and the symbol of its defiance. And how did the 5th Harbinger manifest in America? Nearly 3 years after 9/11, a massive object descended onto the floor of Ground Zero. It was a gazit stone. It had been quarried out of the mountains of upstate New York, 20 tons of hewn stone. As in ancient times, it was brought to the ground of destruction where the buildings had fallen. On July 4th, 2004, American leaders and spectators gathered around the stone in a ceremony that was to mark the beginning of the tower. The leaders pronounced vows over it. One of them, the governor of New York, proclaimed that they were performing the act in the spirit of defiance. As in ancient times, the gazit stone became the embodiment of the nation's vow and the symbol of its defiance.
Okay. So let's read Isaiah 9, verse 10 again. The bricks have fallen down, but we will rebuild with dressed stone. And the dressed stone can also be interpreted as hewn stone. And then also what the author is saying here is gazit stone, which is the Hebrew. Now, that just means a cut of stone, a large quarried cut of stone, straight directly from the mountain. And so it's a huge piece of stone. And that's what he's saying it is. Well, back in Israel, per this prophecy here in Isaiah, that's what they did. They went into the mountains and cut a huge piece of stone to start out the foundation of the rebuild. Okay? Well, guess what? In America, that is actually what happened as well. They cut a huge piece of stone, just like you heard in the excerpt there. What they did is they went out to the Adirondack Mountains. I don't know how you say that. But the mountains in New York, they went out there and quarried a huge piece of stone. The stone was 9 feet wide, 5 feet tall, and 4 foot thick. It was 20 tons. 20 tons of stone. It's huge. So it's this huge piece of stone, which is a huge cut of hewn stone. Well, I want to talk about the stone for a second here. Actually, I want to go back to the last Harbinger where they were in defiance saying we will rebuild in the last episode. Well, in that last episode, I was mentioning it kind of crossed over a little bit into this Harbinger about the dressed stone or the hewn stone. And the lady from raptureready.com was talking about how she was bothered by that specific fact that there was an opposing view, an opposing author to Rabbi Jonathan Cahn, and he specifically talked about the hewn stone that was cut, brought to Ground Zero, but then he was criticizing the author Cahn because Cahn did not report in his book that stone was actually later removed. And if you listen to the last podcast or the last episode, you know what I'm saying. I'm repeating this. So the lady from Rapture Ready, Nuara, anyways, she had a problem accepting that, going, oh, well, I guess there's a problem with that. And then she went to sleep and left on the TV and then woke up, and on the TV was a sermon or whatever. And the pastor was talking about Psalm 118:22, which says this: the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Now that verse back in Psalm, you didn't know exactly what that meant, but it was a prophetic word there in the Psalms, because later on it's referenced in Matthew 21 verse 42. It says, Jesus said to them, have you never read in the scriptures, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This is from the Lord, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Then it's repeated again in Mark 12 verse 10, and then also in Luke talks about it as well. Finally in Acts, it says, this Jesus is, quote, the stone you builders rejected, which has become the cornerstone. So it was repeated multiple times in the Bible. And then in Acts 4:11, that's where it's laid out plainly that Jesus is the stone. Well, she talks about how when she woke up and the pastor was was repeating the stone which the builders refused has become the cornerstone. Psalm 118:22, she immediately related it to the freedom stone, the stone that was brought to be the cornerstone of the new tower, the Freedom Tower, which is now called the One World Trade Center Tower. And then she was like, wow, that is amazing. And then so that's why I'm bringing this up, because it is actually amazing. Because if you actually read on it, that actual stone, the Freedom Stone, was rejected a couple of times. Not only was it rejected from the site, okay, because it was literally supposed to be the cornerstone of the new towers, or tower, I should say. And it was rejected. It was moved out because they changed their mind and they moved it out. Well, it was sitting in a warehouse for a while. It went back to the people that donated it. And it was donated by a company called Innovative Stone. And it was a company in New York. They cut it. They did the nice little engraving and all that stuff on the stone. Well, the owner donated it originally. And then it was brought back to them because they weren't going to use it. She stored it for 3 years in a warehouse. And then later on, she displayed it and all that stuff. Well, that company went Chapter 11, reorganization, bankruptcy. And it was bought again by someone else. The company's assets were bought by another company called Woodside Capital Partners in Massachusetts. Well, they liquefied all the assets. And so it was rejected again. And then finally was purchased in a whole inventory purchase by another company. And so it was it was a separate transaction, but it was transferred to another company. And what had happened was that company now put it in their front yard of their business. And so it's sitting there. But the fact is that cornerstone was rejected twice. And so I'm thinking, whoa, that is crazy. So my thought on this is that since it was rejected as the foundational stone for the towers, I think Psalm 118:22 comes into play here. Totally. It matches up with the Isaiah 9 prophecy. They're going to rebuild with dressed stone, so they cut out this hewn stone. Okay, great. But then the stone that the builders rejected becomes the cornerstone. Jesus, again, rejecting God. I think it goes along with this whole thing, and that's where she's talking about she was blown away by it and then really was caught, I think God was speaking to me kind of thing about this specific, issue about the stone, the cornerstone. Okay, well, that's it for this episode. And we're moving along through these harbingers. We're on number 5. We're going to be heading to number 9. And until the next one, stay safe, stay motivated, and keep seeking liberty. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Liberty Podcast with Clint Armitage. If you want to get in touch, email us at info@clintarmitage.com.